Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the Printed Circuit Podcast, where we discuss trends, challenges, and opportunities across the printed circuit engineering industry. I'm your host, Steph Chavez. In this episode, we'll focus on connecting the dots in EDA, a journey through reuse methodologies. I'm extremely excited about this episode because here to join me in this discussion are my dear friends, Andre Mosley and Carlos Gasca. Thanks for being here, gents.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
The three of us, we've been on the podcast before. I want to share, Carlos and I have a bit of a lengthy history because we worked together in the past at our previous employer, where we both attacked the design, both from an electrical engineering standpoint and a PCB designer standpoint. Utilizing reuse was a big thing for one of our customers, actually for many of our customers, but how do you implement that and how do you go about that? And it's a challenge because when you think about what customers are willing to pay, they want their product now and they want it fast, but what they don't want is that they keep coming back to the table for your services. They don't want you to have to redo circuitry over and over again that you've been designing for them. So how can you reuse product that you've already made for them and service them faster and utilize known good circuitry? And this is where design reuse really, you see the power within utilizing design reuse in that regard. So like I said, Carlos and I have a lot of experience in attacking that, especially before the evolution of how reuse is where we are today, which is it's really powerful in our tool set. Carlos, do you want to share your experiences as well, or reflect on our relationship as it evolved over the years?
Yeah, of course, Steph. And then thanks for having me on. So just a little bit about me for the people who don't know me. I was an electrical engineer designer early on, and I was able to design with SF, and we did informal reuse. We took circuitry and we replicated it several times in the schematic and the layout world. And in another life, I was also an EDM admin. So I was a system administrator for a company where I was able to handle the administration for data management tools that included schematic and layout tools as well. So it's been a great journey. It's been interesting going from being a designer to the other side, being an administrator. And it kind of helped me piece together two parts of the design world, because as a designer, I didn't realize all that went into having a centralized library, having your parts ready, everything that was done for you in the background just for you to be able to place a symbol or a footprint on a tool. But again, thank you for this opportunity. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
You coming to Siemens, that really puts you in sync on Andre's team, and actually even before, when Andre and you were collaborating before you came to Siemens and evolved. Andre, you want to share some of that initial relationship evolution?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's actually kind of a funny story, right? Because for me, as kind of a marketing and product specialist with data management, I remember, Steph, when we hired you being kind of the industry standard pioneer, and we were kind of talking. And then one day, it just so happened, Carlos at the time was a customer. And I was just saying, man, I'm working with this guy at this company and he's doing some great things. He's really great. And his name is Carlos. And Steph is like, wait, I think I know him. And so we just started to talk back and forth. And I was like, oh my gosh, we all three know each other. And you know Carlos? It's like, I won't say too much, but it was like, I can't wait to hire this guy, right? And so when that was going to occur, I was like, hey, when all three of us get together, we are going to have to do a podcast about these technologies. And here we are. So I'm really excited. I know there are going to be many great podcasts that we talk about. I'm looking forward to all three of us getting together and just giving our different perspectives. Me from marketing, you, Steph, as an industry expert, and then Carlos is someone that's actually implemented data management technology. So
you guys have been on the podcast before, and I had you one-on-one. Those were great episodes. But a few weeks ago, we were together in Colorado. While we were there, we started collaborating, and you could have put a videotape on us and recorded us, with the discussions
exactly.
we were having night after night. It was just amazing. So here we are. But let's get right into it. One of the things I want to talk about is the need for reuse technologies. When we look at the landscape of EDA industry, when it comes to reuse methodologies and how it first came about, when you think about reuse, start from the essence of reuse. You think about a component in a library. That component, whether it's a cap, resistor, IC, it's constantly being reused, from design to design. And as industry evolves and our tools have evolved, we're now able to capture circuitry and layouts and reuse them. Now, I'm not talking about entire, reuse a power supply board. I'm talking about circuitry itself, whether you're using a circuitry that has a layout that maybe have 6 layers, 8 layers, whatever the case, you're able to now save these in your library and reuse them once they're proven good. And so that way, when you go into layout, you can then implement these known good circuitries to save you time to have to redo that. Because I can tell you in my career, there's many a times where I am relaying out the same power supply or the same memory or IC, what have you. A lot of times in the old ways, it was just copy circuit and paste. Well, that's not the same as reuse. When we talk about reuse is you need to know where it's being used, what version of it is, how can you track it within the library's data. When you talk about a database management system, how we do that. And then there's why would I do that? I have no issues or I have no reason to reuse. Well, if you can shave time off of your design cycle time, whether it's a quarter of time or 1/3, isn't it worth it to be able to get to market faster or to get your product in the lab faster? Because that's where the magic happens, not on the computer, in the lab. That's where the double E's really do their magic, and getting that product, bringing it to life.
What was the impetus for you and Carlos kind of jumping into reuse, right? I mean, that was, I won't say how old we are, but that was back when there wasn't a lot of great technologies available to implement reuse. So like, Carlos, what got you into this with Steph?
So now today we're spoiled with data management. When Steph and I were designing a board, it was very informal. So I think it being informal and also having a timeline, one made reuse paramount, right? We were able to reuse circuitry and layout and expedite things. But there were some downfalls, right? It wasn't as streamlined as it could be. Another big thing is Steph and I couldn't work on this design at the same time. So I remember times where I would work during the day and then Steph would just pick up the design after I finished my shift, and Steph would work throughout the night. And it was just this cycle of, schematic layout. And more or less, it was also making sure that the blocks or the designs I was creating within the schematic were also well synchronized with the layout, ensuring that any changes I made to the circuitry up front were reflected well in the layout. So there were some uphill battles early on. I wish we had data management as a way to track the versions of each of the changes I made, rather than zipping up the whole design and then storing on a file share and just labeling it revision 1 and hoping nobody goes in and deletes it. That and just storing simulation data or requirements along with that one particular circuitry that we were hoping to reuse several times.
You're right, Carlos. And not to interrupt, but I do want to clarify. We had the ability to be in the design at the same time. But when you talk about reuse, when Carlos has got to make a change to one of the blocks, it was very difficult because it was very informal if he changed the blocks and how we did it. And control is everything. How do you control that without causing me too much of a headache downstream, meaning in layout? Not only was Carlos doing this at the schematic level, but he was always doing it even more left at the system level from the system blocks when he's working with the software team and the firmware team. So when you talk about that collaboration, which is the whole essence of total collaboration within the ecosystem that we were in there at our previous employer, it was a challenge because of the informal way we did it. And ultimately, the push to implement reuse was driven by the customer. The customer was fed up with the amount of time it took to deliver a product as well as the cost. And they were looking to ways to reduce this. And the customer came to us and said, you are doing basically the same systems over and over, and you're redoing them manually. Can't we reuse to save us time and money? Because that product is already on an aircraft and it's already certified. Why are we redoing it again and again? So that was ultimately the driving force.
So Steph, it was more like top down. It wasn't, you guys kind of took on that responsibility. It was driven from the top down. Yeah, I can see that be a challenge, because usually engineers don't really kind of start with the reuse. They're used to kind of just doing it on their own. Did you guys find challenges in getting that to the engineers, or because it was top down, it was a little bit easier to deploy and people were more receptive to doing the managed blocks?
The biggest thing, and I think Carlos would agree, is it's not that the engineers don't want to implement it, because believe me, most engineers, they want to be able to design faster and better. But the challenge is when you work with specific enterprise level companies, who is paying for your time to do what? For you to be optimized in your process, the customer is not willing to pay you to optimize your process. They want to pay you for their product. So when you talk about reuse in harmonizing your ecosystem, customers don't really care about process. They want the delivery of the final product at the best quality and lowest price. And that was a challenge. And Carlos, I think you want to elaborate more on that?
So on that, I think there was some early hesitation. I think it's just a general cultural thing that you see within large enterprises, where there's some people tend to be skeptical when doing reuse. They don't understand who designed it, where it came from, is there analysis associated with it, what requirements were designed, and it's not well specified. I think, especially with a lack of data management, you kind of just find it passed on from engineer to engineer. If it's in a central library, then there might be a little bit more of a formal way to verify, or where it came from and so on. But I think it was somewhat special because I was pretty early on in my career when you and I were working on reuse, and just being able to see designs that were previously reused on a certain product. I was able then to get inspiration to see, all right, can I design something new, or can we reuse what was there? Let me see what other engineers have done. And I think it definitely helps streamline the learning curve, right? So if I was trying to learn how to design a certain circuit, I could go, and it was in a way almost asking Google or AI, like, hey, give me ideas. So it was just great to be able to look at other work. But there is some hesitancy when people are adopting reuse for sure. People just want to make sure it's a good known circuit before they start using it within a design.
That's a great segue into when we think about the challenges and benefits of implementing reuse. There are certain benefits that you can take advantage of, but know that there's a form of complexity that comes along with it. But you think about anything, high end, it's high end because there's a lot of things going on in the background that allows you to achieve very complex designs very efficiently. And it's a huge benefit when you, your team members, and your culture of your ecosystem buy into the fact that we are going to implement reuse. Because if you stand back, we have all been doing reuse. When you think about our libraries, very simple libraries, like I said, resistors, caps, you take that same concept and just apply it to circuitry and layouts. And yeah, not every reuse is going to be able to be reused in the same form factor, but we have the ability to bring these blocks in and then make any alterations to them or edits to them or adjustments to fit in the envelope of where your design needs to fit to. And then you can save that as a different version and then save it back into the library. And version 1, version 2, or AB, however your ecosystem decides to configure it. But that gives you much more strength in adapting to what is in front of you to meet your customer's requirement. And speed is a key here. How can you do it fast, knowing that you're already designing with something that's a known variable? So when you get into the lab, you're not guessing, oh, I hope this circuit works. You already know it works. It's already proven.
I know we talked about the challenges of early on using a formal reuse, but now if we focus on the benefits, I think a lot of benefits come from having a data management system, right? As an engineer, if I'm looking for a power supply design that I can reuse, having a data management system allows me to have parametric data that I can search on, filter by, and quickly identify, oh, this power supply is for 5 volts. Let me go ahead and use it. And then within the same data management system, you can upload your simulation results, maybe a brief excerpt from your requirements, and kind of show this design fits these results and these requirements. And it just gives me confidence to go and reuse the design. Maybe I'll tweak it a little. Maybe I need a 7-volt output for some reason, and I can maybe reuse it, create a variant, and then push it back into the library, add my notes, add a new version. And going back to the design with confidence, right? It just makes you a better designer and ultimately just streamlines the whole process.
Because we're kind of talking about the benefits and the challenges and how it's actually evolved from where you guys started with the informal reuse, right? Again, all the benefits of things like leveraging the existing investment and predictable results and the efficiency, but also those challenges, right? Not invented here syndrome is a lot of the times you'll hear, or it's just a cultural thing. It's like, even though there's a block on disk, does it have all the information that I need? And so as you've been mentioning, Carlos, now with the evolution of these reuse methodologies with the data management environment, I can actually inspect it. It's not just some folder on disk. I can actually graphically take a look at it. I can look at its constraints. I can look at it, see if it has variance. There's a data sheet maybe associated with it and how it was used and how it was manufactured. It's because it has evolved from informal to more formal. Reuse has evolved. So as you were saying, Steph, we're all used to reuse. We start with libraries. That's the lowest level of reuse, right? A symbol, a cell, a model, and I want to reuse that in my library. And now we've evolved into, from informal to actually managed reuse. I think that's really important, right? So, Steph, from your perspective, do you see any industry changes? Is it getting a little bit easier now that the tools have evolved, the technology has evolved? I know you do a lot of training out there. What do you see, Steph?
It is evolving, but like anything else, automation in general, and I categorize reuse as part of the automation because of how our tools are evolving in the industry. But there's always a hesitation for designers to, and not just designers, but engineers to use some of this automation, and specifically reuse. As Carlos mentioned, a lot of engineers, when they're creating circuitry, they don't trust or they don't know who created the circuitry before them. So they want to make sure that they are creating their own circuitry. Or maybe they may see something that, hey, I really wanted to try this new part. Well, that's all great, but it's not proven. And now you're reinventing circuitry when you already have circuitry that's already certified and on an aircraft or already in the market. Why would you waste time and money reinventing something that's already working, that's already perfectly viable to meet your needs? And this is where reuse comes in. As I was at PCB East last week, there's a lot of designers that when they did their sessions or their training sessions and lecturing, they brought some golden nuggets where they are implementing a form of reuse in their ecosystems, or they're looking to form, but there's a bit of hesitation because within the culture of their ecosystem, there's hesitation, because it's hard to let go of the manual processes that are there that has allowed them to be successful in their system. But their level of success could maybe at best be 65 to 75%. They're leaving 25% on the table. We're utilizing today's horsepower like reuse in the ecosystems. Today, with a good database management system allows you to really take advantage of horsepower and leverage known good data, known good layouts to go forward. And it would behoove companies or OEMs who have the ability to do this to really implement it and take advantage of it.
With the data management system, kind of helps turn hesitation into confidence, especially if we're able to report where's that circuit being reused. Is it just one design? Is it in 10, 100 designs? Let me get a feel for that. So with a data management system, we're able to create reports, kind of help the end user and also management understand, what engineers design the most reusable circuits, where is this reuse circuit being used, and it just kind of helps build that next level of confidence when the designer is using that managed block or that reusable block in their design.
That reminds me of kind of a real world impact case study that I was involved in, right? One of my first customers, within our tool suite, we had informal reuse, and we moved that and evolved that into more of a formal or what we call managed blocks. One of the things that this company really understood is kind of back to the story that Steph, that you talked about. It was the customer that drove the cultural change, saying, look, I need this. And so the best case studies that I've seen is when management says, look, this is important to my organization. I need to reduce risk. I need to leverage our resources. And they recognize that the greatest IP, besides the employees that they employ, is the data that they create. And so IP is so important to them. They said, look, I want to change the culture because I do realize that there's the challenges. How can I outweigh that with the benefit? And one of the things that they started to implement, again, and then tying into what you just said, Carlos, in terms of the reporting, is that management said, hey, we're going to give an incentive to the engineers that actually create the most used block. I'm going to give an incentive to my engineers that are using these blocks because it translates into real dollars, right? They recognize that, look, if I'm going to change the culture, I have to give a benefit to those users as opposed to just saying, hey, I wish you would reuse technologies. They had to put the tools and the processes and then the benefits in place, but that's all needs to be connected, right? I can't just say, oh, go start doing reuse. If I don't provide the reporting to say, hey, who created the most reuse block? How much money did we save? Can we broadcast that internally within the organization so that I can see all those benefits? And again, I think just as a summary of what we've all talked about today, we talked about the evolution of reuse from informal to formal. We talked about the challenges and the benefits and how we've evolved that technology to address those challenges. And again, real world case scenarios that connect all three of those stories. I think it's pretty obvious that reuse is extremely important. It's an important technology, and customers really need to be taking advantage of that.
Yeah, I think if we're talking about real world, I think we also should mention there is quite a bit of planning that goes into the strategy of reuse, right? You need to understand how big should the reuse circuit be. Steph mentioned earlier, you're not going to reuse a whole power supply card. Maybe you'll just use like a buck converter reuse, right? Or you don't want to make it too small where it's just a simple, AND gate or something along those lines. The definition of what a reuse block should be how you're going to store your requirements, how does that align with your system blocks if you're using like Cameo or other system tools. That, and also how are you going to categorize your reuse blocks, right? Are you going to do like analog, digital, RF? Are you going to do it by like power supply from? All this should be decided somewhat upfront so that way you can start organizing your use blocks accordingly within your data management. And also you need to understand who can see my managed blocks, right? Going back to security, am I going to just have an ITAR section, non-ITAR? Is this only for certain business divisions within a large corporation? So there is a bit of planning that goes into reuse. And if you do it up front, I believe that allows you're preparing for success at that point.
To add to that, especially when we talk about the evolution and the future of reuse methodologies, I mean, the biggest concern of most of people's IP is security. This is where you need to have a very strong database management system and how you do that and how you control who sees what. I mean, because we've, Carlos, you and I, and Andre, I'm sure you as well, in your past, at one point or another, you worked on a global team where, and I say global, I'm talking about on the other side of that pond. And how do you, restrict the access, but yet still able to collaborate on certain projects? And this is where a good, strong database management system comes in to allow you to do that. When you talk about reporting, and when I think about reuse, how quickly you can come up with like, well, how much is it going to cost to build this processor or this widget that we got to design, whether it's a regulator or this power supply box? How much is it going to cost? You can quickly say, well, I'm going to need this many blocks. I'm going to need this many. You already have a cost breakdown within that. And very quickly, you can assess what is the cost going to be? How much real estate is it going to take up? It's very easy to do that. And then one of the things is, with the supply chain disruptions that we've seen coming out of COVID that is still, causing havoc in the industry, is if something does happen where you have a part shortage or material shortage, it's very quickly to assess through your strong database management system is what part is used in what blocks and where. That intelligence is key in how we control that. So I can foresee that the reuse evolution within the industry is going to get even more and more mainstream because of the fact that you want to be able to get to market faster. In order to be competitive, you're going to have to start taking advantage or adopting these methodologies. I mean, Andre, from your standpoint, being in marketing much longer than Carlos and I have, what is your take on that?
I'm glad you brought up security. That has become one of the number one topics that we've seen recently. Specifically because you still want to proliferate reuse within your organization, but you've got designs that could be ITAR, you've got export control, you've got all these different regulations on who can see what. And so at the forefront of reuse means, hey, can I access it? Do I have availability to use this? And so you may want to have blocks that are available to all users or blocks that are only available to specific regions. And so adding in security along with the data management platform, it's really important that you can track that. And again, we'll see more and more of this, and the need to even know, not only did I reuse a design, but did someone get access to it that they weren't supposed to, right? I know Carlos, he was doing that, and this is one of the reasons we hired him. He had that experience where he was building in these fantastic reports on top of the data management platform to be able to reactively and proactively identify if there were security concerns. And Carlos, I don't know if you want to mention a little bit about that security and how you were able to, put that together for your customer.
Yeah, so with the data management system, we were able to export that data, and from there I was able to parse it and create a compliance report, letting me know if a user was in a project they shouldn't be in, and I would be able to flag and provide the right information to the right people. So, it is paramount having the right security, making sure it's in place for any upcoming audits. And it's just best practice, having the right security. I do have maybe a history lesson or question for you, Steph. Early on in your career, what was reuse like then? Because I know we have like informal reuse maybe like 5-7 years ago. And today we have like a data management reuse. But let's say like 20 years ago, as a young designer, where did you see reuse?
Reuse wasn't even a thought or a term. Basically, it was just, I did this before and I want to copy it. How can I copy it? So back in those days, it was, okay, now I need to export it out like a DFX file or something. Or, hey, I'm going to open this schematic. I'm going to copy this circuit into this schematic sheet. It was like a very legacy process. And then, okay, where was that used? I don't know. I'd have to go look and see, do manual searches if I happen to be fortunate to be in a company that actually had an established management system or a PLM system. But let's be honest, 20, 30 years ago, when I was green off the blocks there, it's on a server and you're going to manually go look at stuff. I had John or Paul or whoever, that was the person who you talked to go, hey, I need you to go look at this. Where is this? And then we're looking. And it was a very manual process, very prone to errors. And as the industry evolves, tools evolve. And now today, when we think about the designer's evolution in training of the next generation of engineers, how do we best use managed blocks is key to implementing their evolution. It's not just training. Like, I'll just be specific with board design because that's really my passion and my expertise is how do you train a designer to be good at board design? Well, they have to understand the essence of pure board design, regardless of your tool set. But at the same time, you do have to master your tool set and how to be efficient to wield that tool to be able to design. But you've got to understand the basics of design, meaning like a balanced stack up, or if you have certain impedance requirements, making sure you're routing traces over a dedicated reference plane and stuff like that. Reuse blocks is the same way. You got to make sure you're training your designers to evolve with the power that they have. And it's a culture buy-in. You got to buy in and you got to establish a culture of evolution and taking advantage of these tools today. Not just circuitry or constraints or variants, and training OEM and contract manufacturers on how they can create and manage blocks so that the customers can easily add these elements to their design is key. It's an evolution. It's a constant evolution. And now, don't even get me started when you think about machine learning or AI. That's a whole nother ballgame.
Steph, I was going to say before I know we're going to conclude here, I know that Carlos, he's the young buck out of the both of us. I won't say how old I am, but we were talking about, how you were sharing data. I remember when I was designing, we didn't even have email. Right? That didn't even
exactly.
exist. It was like, how are you going to share data? And as you mentioned, now there's AI, right? And so we have definitely evolved over time with the ability to first not even having the ability to share a file, to getting email, to now having informal reuse, to having managed reuse. And then with the AI technologies that we are all working on as we move forward, it's really great industry to be a part of.
Yeah, even in the last 5 years of collaboration in the cloud, right? Because I remember Steph and I would exchange PDF comments like, oh, go ahead and fix this or go back and forth. But now I can just quickly, and everything's like that. Most tools, you have this great online cloud collaboration that you can quickly drop a note, feedback, and it's great for designing.
Most definitely. We're definitely running out of time here, but let me just recap, okay? Reuse is a valuable concept, a valuable methodology going forward. And those companies that get on board and implement this, they will be leading the pack and achieving success faster. Reuse is sometimes seen as difficult to adopt because of the amount of upfront strategy or what it takes to create the blocks. But just like constraints, a lot in design, a lot of people are like, why does it take so long? How can we start around it? Because you've got to take the time to put your constraints in correctly and make sure those constraints meet your requirements. But once you got them in, oh my gosh, it's all downhill from there. You're designing quality into your product. You're not checking for quality in. Reuse is the same way. You're designing quality known circuitry into your product. So there's no guesswork at the end. And what I mean at the end is getting that product in the lab and you fired up the first time. And Carlos being a double E, he knows exactly what I'm talking about. And those that are out there that are double E's know that it's nice to be able to fire your board up and know that the first time you turn it on, it's going to work. Let's be honest, the three of us are Siemens employees, and our solutions that we offer today, we meet these challenges where we're designing tomorrow's designs today and utilizing our ecosystem to be able to do that. And it allows us to do it very effectively and very efficiently when it's adopted as the full ecosystem that we offer. And we've seen the best adoptions when it comes to the training and management and buy-in, within the culture of design, and it's changed along with the ECAT process. When we think about the overall process of what we bring to the table, it's definitely evolution. Is there anything that Carlos or Andre, anything else, last parting words you guys like to add before I close it out?
This has been great, and talking to you guys, it's just wonderful, bouncing ideas off one another. So, no, thank you for having me on again.
Yeah, I agree. I think the only thing is I feel old now talking about emails not existing when I was doing design.
No, don't even get me started. I remember when I deployed and I was in the Marine Corps, we were using snail mail. That's how I communicated with my family members. So, yeah.
Carlos, that's when you put a stamp on a letter just to let them know.
Oh, okay.
Exactly.
I was about to Google that right now.
Yeah. I think that's all we have time for today. Andre, Carlos, thanks for sharing your insights and connecting the dots in EDA, a journey through reuse methodologies. To our audience, continue to tune in for more trends, challenges, and opportunities across the printed circuit industry.